I'm Polly Warren and welcome to the Positive Perimenopause Podcast. This is the place for some positive inspiration to help you through the rollercoaster ride of perimenopause. I truly believe that with the right support, knowledge and wellness tools, you can feel your best yet, because I'm learning this life phase can be a truly exciting and often pivotal time of life. With every episode, my mission is to support and empower you to own your menopause, because it's time to start taking care of the most important person, and yes, that's you. So thank you for being here and sharing your time with me. Now let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing? I hope you've had a good week. I've got an incredible episode for you this week. But before I talk about that, if you haven't already listened to last week's episode, which was all about how herbal medicine can help you through perimenopause and menopause, I really recommend you go and have a listen. It's with the wonderful herbalist Melinda McDougall, and there is so much fantastic information in there, and particularly if you're interested in having a natural menopause, I really recommend having a listen. Okay, on to this week's episode, which honestly is an amazing episode because I speak to Ani Naqvi, whose story really is one of inspiration, of resilience, of strength. It's really such an incredible story. Ani is an ex-BBC journalist and researcher, and back in 2004, she was on holiday visiting a friend in Sri Lanka for Christmas. However, in 2004, as most of the world know, there was the Asian tsunami where Ani almost died. Shortly after the tsunami, Ani appeared on Oprah questioning why she survived when so many people died. To say Ani is a survivor is a massive understatement, as even prior to the tsunami, she'd overcome a variety of challenges, including 4 other brushes with death, all before she was 40. It took her 14 years from the tsunami, as well as stage 4 breast cancer 5 years later on, for her to finally learn the lessons that these multiple brushes with death were trying to teach her. Ani worked on her mindset, her emotions, her body, her spirit and her soul, her energy and her lifestyle to heal herself. She got into yoga, meditation, hypnotherapy, Reiki, acupuncture, Ayurveda, EFT, so many different wellness practices in a big way. And now I'm so happy to say that she is the happiest she's ever been. She realised that as an ex-BBC journalist and researcher, she'd used her skills to do everything she possibly could to heal herself from the traumatic events in her life and also her threatening illness. And now she uses those skills and experiences to help others. So much of the work Ani does is to help them find their purpose. And I know personally for myself, when I hit perimenopause, I really lost my way and felt there was more to life. And I think many of you feel the same. And this is something Ani really understands deeply and really helps others with. Ani is truly amazing, and I'm so grateful that she shared her story with me for this podcast. So without further ado, please welcome the inspirational Ani Naqvi. So Ani, it's really lovely to see you today. We made this work, third time lucky. Life often just gets in the way, so I'm really very grateful for you to be here today with me and make the time.
Thank you for having me on the podcast as well.
No problem. So Ani, today you are a transformation coach. You're on a mission to support 250,000 people to properly thrive in life. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about that. But first, I think it's important to talk about what is driving your mission. So it started after you survived the 2004 Asian tsunami, which is something obviously the whole world knows about. I can't possibly imagine your experience. So I wondered today if you'd be able to share a little bit about that life-changing Boxing Day back in 2004, and so we can try and understand the impact it's had on your life.
Sure. So I was asleep in my hut on Boxing Day when the tsunami hit, and had struggled with well, as you can imagine, the door suddenly crashes open and all this water comes, crashing into the room. One minute you're fast asleep, the next, and nursing a hangover from Christmas festivities. The next minute you're underwater and drowning and fighting for your life and not knowing what has happened at all. And obviously, that whole thing went on for some time. I thought the first time I thought I was going to die, I was in the hut. And, I was kind of like submerged underwater and couldn't see anything, just couldn't see which way was up or down. And then luckily, the hut began to disintegrate after some time, and I began to get washed inland with the tsunami, got trapped underneath a falling building, again thought I was going to die, and then remembered a palm reading that I'd had years before, that they'd said to me I was going to have a near-death experience, that I would survive it. And that memory or that thought popped into my head at the very time that I was trapped underneath everything. And at that same time, so I thought to myself, okay, this isn't my death, right? Because this is my near-death experience that they talked about. And at the same time, whatever was holding me down kind of moved out the way, and I was able to surface once more. I'm condensing the story, obviously, in terms of what actually happened in the tsunami, because I'm trying to get to the point of where my purpose came from. So obviously I was lucky and I got thrown into the path of a tree, and eventually made it back to my friends. We nearly got caught in the second tsunami that came along. We had 7 big tsunamis where we were on the east coast of Sri Lanka, which was the second worst hit after Indonesia. And when we eventually made it to higher ground after, narrowly missing another second tsunami, and, all of this kind of detail of the kind of like panic and everything, understandably, I kind of fell apart for the first few moments, and, I couldn't really comprehend anything that had happened, because I still thought I was having this nightmare, rather than it being a reality. And so then I sort of noticed that other people were calling out for their loved ones, and I was lucky that my loved ones were safe and well, and I was with them. And a voice, and the same voice had come to me while I was in the hut as well, and it had come to me and it had said, so in the hut it had said to me, "Remember this moment, you do not want to die," and which was very powerful, because in darker moments after the tsunami, I would often remember that and think, okay, well, you're feeling down at the moment, but you don't want to die. So you're just having a bad day, week, month, or whatever, and it will pass. And that knowledge, or that, this visceral knowing, sometimes when you're depressed, right, you wish your life away. And, that's what I was doing at the time, was not wishing my life away, but I used to have a lot of kind of these suicide ideation fantasies at the time. So that was very meaningful for me when I was stuck in the hut, that I had this experience of this realization that I didn't want to die, and that I was fighting tooth and nail to stay alive. And really, realistically, I could have easily have just given up then. I mean, nobody would have known any different. It's not like committing suicide, right? Like, almost a 250,000 people died in that tsunami. One more wouldn't have, it would have been completely normal. In fact, it's a miracle that anyone survived, let alone didn't, if you see what I mean. So but this voice again came to me on the hill, and it said, look, these people, you're okay, and your friends are okay, but these people are they're still lost their, you know, partners, their children, etc. And this voice again came and said, you know, these people need you. And this sense of something greater than me, this sense of connection to humanity and to a greater consciousness or greater kind of something, is what kind of got me out of my own hysteria and pulled me out of my own abject terror and panic. And I then started to serve others by, first I started with the first aid, and then later on, a jeep came up to the hill, and then my journalistic instincts from when I was a broadcast journalist at the BBC kicked in, and I commandeered the radio from the jeep to start listening to the news, to find out what had happened, started to broadcast the news to everybody. Obviously, nobody knew what happened. So everybody's like hanging on your every word when you're talking to them about what's happened and everything. And it was once I understood the scale of the disaster, when they started, the early reports were very sparse on information, but as the day progressed, they started to talk about it having been a tsunami that had gone across the whole of Asia, and multiple countries had been affected: Sri Lanka and Indonesia and India and Thailand and all these other countries. And I started to realize that given where we were on the east coast of Sri Lanka, which was fairly remote, it wasn't in season at the time, and it's on the other side of the island, it's where the Muslims and the Tamils live, that we would probably not be a priority to be rescued. And we had the fifth wave had taken out the bridge that had connected where we were to the mainland. So we were literally surrounded by a crocodile-filled lagoon and a leopard-filled jungle and a killer tsunami on one side. So I don't know how, but this is the beauty of I don't know, us, humanity, God, the universe, whatever you want to name it as. I managed to remember the number of the BBC switchboard from when I'd worked there 5 years before. And I remember the number. This is the days before smartphones and everything. And I was able to use this guy who had the Jeep. He had a cell phone, use his cell phone to call the BBC to get them to contact the British High Commission for us so that we could get rescued. And sure enough, they did do that for me. And the British High Commission called me back about an hour later and promised that they would send choppers in to rescue us, but that it was already too late in the day that day to do that, because I think by now it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something. And Sri Lanka is quite near the equator, so it's kind of like 6 till 6 is daylight. So they said, look, you're absolutely right. All of the choppers were deployed to the south, and we will send them to you, but we're not going to be able to get them to you tonight before it gets dark, so we'll have to come first thing in the morning. So obviously we didn't have any water to drink, any food or anything like that, so I said, well, what are we going to do about all of those things? He said, okay, well, we'll send the army round. And so we'll send the army round with some supplies, and some people called out and said, get them to bring cigarettes, because everyone's so stressed out that they wanted some cigarettes. And sure enough, the army did come round later that evening and with some supplies, but they also came round saying, we're going to need to move you. I'm going to need to move you to higher ground. And obviously, and I remember this scene particularly well, because I had a middle-aged man. I was only just in my early 30s at the time. So I had this middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair grabbing hold of one arm, my left arm, and this middle-aged woman, Israeli woman, grabbing hold of the other arm, and this 6-year-old little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who was the daughter of one of the other guests in the guest house that we were staying in. And she was literally standing on my right foot and clamped onto my right leg. So I couldn't move with these 3 people on my each limb. And they were all hysterical and panicked and crying, particularly this little girl. And I just remember her face so clearly, these big blue eyes and this kind of like face all streaked with like black and dirt and tears and everything. And just their intensity of their because obviously they were looking to me as the leader, as the person that had done the broadcasting, called the BBC and all that kind of thing. And they were like, we don't want to go to the seafront, because the army wanted to move us to another town because there was going to be another tsunami coming, according to them. And the only way they could do that was to drive us along the seafront. So everybody was in this panicked state. And I was racking my brains again, and I was thinking, oh my God, what can I do? Like, I can't break down here. I'm just as scared as they are, but they're looking to me. And I just thought, call the BBC. They will have had seismologists on all day. And so I called them, and they luckily confirmed that there was not going to be another tsunami, and that these were just some reports that they were getting in places like Sri Lanka and India, but there was no scientific data or evidence to suggest that there was going to be another tsunami or anything like that. So we all breathed a sigh of relief and all decided to stay where we were. And sure enough, the choppers did come the following morning. In the meantime, I'd done a register of everybody that was there. So I'd busied myself by writing names and nationalities and the severity of people's injuries in order to try to get people that were the most injured onto those first choppers. Whether you were local or a foreigner, it didn't matter. But unfortunately, understandably, some people kind of, rushed the first choppers that came in their panic to get out. And I remember having this very futile shouting match with an army guy of about 18 years old with a Kalashnikov, saying, if they can run, it means they're okay. These people are going to die if you don't get them help. But, obviously nobody had seen a disaster of that scale before ever, let alone in Sri Lanka. These guys were young, army guys that were just completely clueless. And of course, they're not going to go against the tourists for their people, because it's, it was an international disaster. But we all got on the choppers eventually, and I got everyone onto the choppers first, and then I got onto the last chopper myself as well.
My goodness. I mean, thank you so much for sharing, because I can see that it's obviously, not easy to go back to that spot. I mean, when you put it in context that you were a woman in her 30s who was were you just on holiday? You were on holiday in Sri Lanka at the time over Christmas.
Yeah.
And the last thing you expect to happen. And I was actually on a holiday. I was doing exactly the same, exactly a year before that. And it just sort of, for me, it just really puts that into context, that I was on Unawatuna Beach, which also got hit quite badly by a tsunami. You were there on holiday, and then this horrendous experience happened. You must have been, throughout that whole experience, and particularly when you were there helping all of those other people before yourself, and you were taking, you took a register and you were remembering the phone number and doing all of that. You yourself obviously must have been absolutely traumatized yourself. Where do you think you found that sort of inner strength from to actually be able to make those calls, to make the register, to have that sort of logical thinking? A very quick break to ask you to hit the follow or subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying this episode, I'd be super grateful if you could hit those stars and rate it too. Thank you.
Well, that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, my coping mechanism was to do things for other people. Okay. Because when was to serve other people, was to kind of help others. By helping others, that gave me some purpose and it gave me something to do. Right. So, and I like to take charge often, I would say. And, I'm a kind of a born leader in many ways. But I don't know what it was. I think it was just intuition and instinct that enabled me to be able to function in those ways and to be able to really and I think it was also previous trauma as well, to be honest, because I think that probably my childhood set me up for giving me the agency that I had. And when I write in my book, I've written a memoir about my story, and I do acknowledge and, say that I'm pretty sure that it was my traumatic and difficult childhood that I had survived that then gave me that strength and that resilience and that resourcefulness to be able to get all of the, to be able to do all of those things in that time. I mean, I believe we've all got our own superpowers, and I definitely think that some of my superpowers are about being resourceful and resilient. If you can throw any problem at me and I will go all the way around the houses to find a solution that works, if you see what I mean. Like I love problem solving. So this kind of resourcefulness, I'm just the kind of person that people come to for different things around resourcefulness and things, because I can find solutions to all sorts of strange problems. So I think I was able to draw on my inner strengths and qualities and my gifts, as well as, this intuitive, instinctive kind of response. I mean, who remembers the number of a place that they worked at 5 years before?
Yeah. Had you been sort of in tune with that intuitiveness before that whole experience? You said, you had that voice in your head when you were holding onto the tree. Had you heard voices before guiding you, or was that something which really was born out of that experience?
It's funny. No, actually, I was saying this to someone the other day. I don't think that I was any different to when I was born, if you see what I mean. So when I was a child, I used to have a lot of psychic phenomenon, let's call it, a lot of like psychic sort of things that would happen. And as a child, I didn't really question it, because, you don't when you're a child, you're very innocent and open-minded and all of that kind of thing. And I just kind of thought that was normal to be, to have premonitions and dreams and be telepathic and all these sort of things. And it was only, and I didn't question what I believed about the world either back then. Like I knew that there was, also because I astral planed a lot when I was a child as well. So, I knew that there was other dimensions and realms and stuff like that, and that we were way more powerful than what we think we are as a human, right? And you don't question any of that when you're a child. It's only when you become an adult that that suddenly you realize that the rest of society is not like that. And then it's almost like a little shutter that goes down. It's like we unlearn everything that we're I feel like we're born knowing everything. And then the older that we get in life, we unlearn it all. So now I'm back in the process of relearning all of those things. And that's also the work that I do with my clients. It's all around, I'm called myself a transformation coach, an executive transformation coach, but actually I'm not transforming anyone. All I'm doing is I'm helping them remember who they really are, because we all have this knowledge and this ability. But yeah, I do feel like some guides of mine were there at the time. And in fact, somebody read my palm or did some reading for me a few years later or something. And they said, they read my palm and they said, oh, your kind of guide is with you all the time. And they kind of literally moved something out of the way. This is somebody that didn't know my story. They said they literally moved something out of the way so that you could survive. So it's like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
And then I also had a psychic who did a reading years after as well. And she described me being, and she didn't know about my history, my story, or anything. She described me being dragged by my hair backwards in water and mud and twigs and darkness. And I was like, oh my God, she's seen the tsunami there. Because that was exactly what was happening. I was being dragged by my hair. It was all like, my friend didn't recognize me when she saw me because I would look like a swamp kind of like monster or something, covered in twigs and branches and everything. So,
were you injured? Did you get injured in the process?
Yeah, I was injured. Yeah, because if you think, I was like a grain of rice in a washing machine in the hut. So imagine you've got all of the furniture that you would have in a room, plus all of your belongings, and you in this swirling, thundering, soupy, dark, water that's coming at you at like hundreds of miles an hour. And it is like a washing machine. It's like if you've ever been a surfer or something and you've been wiped out, imagine wiped out times a billion. That's what it's like. It's like the biggest wipeout that you've ever been through. And people say, oh, could you swim? Or, what about time? Or could you grab hold of anything? You can't do any of those things. You're literally, the force of the tsunami was so strong. It ripped off my clothes, my jewelry. It just took everything from me. Can you imagine rings and underwear being ripped off you from the power of water? It's unimaginable, really.
Yeah, it totally is. And it's a complete miracle that that you are here, that you managed to find your way out. I mean, in terms of kind of just being able to breathe, I can't imagine if you're being swirled around, in terms of getting the airflow into you must have even been difficult. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're underwater most of the time, come up for a gasp of air, back underwater again. It was all like that. And, that's how I kind of, like I said, I think that my life to date had set me up for being able to cope in that situation. In fact, my best friend, because her husband, her boyfriend, he was a 6'5" surfer guy, right? And Australian. And he disappeared there was a first chopper that came and he disappeared on the first chopper. And I remember, and my friend was pregnant at the time. And I remember being like quite sort of like taken aback that he had an injury. Okay. So let me just put that in there. But I was taken aback at the time that he'd left her and his pregnant girlfriend and everything. And she just turned around to me at some point during the day and she said, but you know what, Annie, you know that life has prepared us for this moment. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, you and I have both had very difficult, challenging lives so far. And I said, yeah. And she said, so that's why life has prepared us. Her boyfriend had been, had a really easy, simple life in Australia as a surfer and was not bumming around, but, effectively bumming around, traveling the world, having and then got, met her, they got pregnant and engaged within like 3 months or something, and then was in a tsunami. So I kind of understood what she meant by that. I was like, oh, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every challenge is there to teach us something and is an opportunity for some sort of growth, and it enables us to, helps us through difficult times. So after you were choppered out on that small spot, where were you taken? Were you taken to another part of Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so we were taken to a town called Ampara. I don't know if it's...
Yes, I do remember the name.
So we were taken to Ampara. There was like an army hospital there. We were very unceremoniously triaged, squirts of iodine and bandaged up and thrown out the door again. But obviously they were overwhelmed with the amount of people they were dealing with. So, and they put us all up into guest houses. So some people obviously stayed in the hospital. So my friend's boyfriend ended up staying in the hospital because, like I said, he had this big injury and stuff. But myself, Nate Burkis, who's a TV celebrity in America, and a few other people, the couple from the hut next door, Annalie and Stefan, the four of us were taken to a guest house. Nate and I shared a room, and we had gotten very close through that day. He lost his partner, and he says that when he met me, as soon as he realized that I was a former BBC journalist, broadcast journalist and stuff, that he feels safe with a producer because they know what they're doing and all that kind of thing. So we'd become very close that week. So we stayed in that guest house that night. We were very lucky that my friend Sri lived there. It was her hotel that we were staying in. And so some friends of hers from Colombo, who we'd actually been with on Christmas Eve, but had left on early Christmas morning. So they'd left on Christmas Day to go for Christmas somewhere else. But he'd sent a jeep to come and find us, and he'd found her in the hospital, and she'd sent him out to look for me and the other guys. And then the six of us went back to Colombo with him over the next day or so. Yeah. And so we ended up back in Colombo around the 28th or something it would have been.
So presumably
we spent the Boxing Day night overnight there in the camp. We spent the 27th in that guest house, and then the 28th we arrived at Colombo.
So presumably you obviously had to find some clothes from somewhere. You obviously didn't have anything with you.
No. So obviously we lost everything in the tsunami, but I was naked at the time. So because like I said, I'd had a half naked. Yeah. My clothes had been ripped off me. So I had taken a sarong from someone's washing line. I figured that they wouldn't. They'd rather me be wearing something than be wandering around, naked in a Muslim village and stuff. So I borrowed somebody's sarong that was on their washing line, and so I was just wearing that until we arrived back to Colombo. I think they tried to give us some clothes in the guest house, but if you've been to Sri Lanka, they're quite small. Yes, they're not European sizes, So I don't think we were able to fit into much of what we had. I think we were able to get some flip flops that were like size 5s. I'm a size 7.5.
Right.
But it did the job until we got back to Colombo.
Okay, and then at Colombo, presumably the embassy then got involved and helped you get home.
Well, actually, at the time, our plan was that we were all going to stay and help out with the relief effort.
Okay.
So all 4 of us were going to do that. So we missed all the kind of like the free flights back home with the embassy and all that kind of thing, because also we didn't arrive back to Colombo until a couple of days later. And, the next day we went to go and to the embassies to get money and passports and all of those kind of things. And then the following day, I think we went shopping, or the same day we went shopping or something. But we didn't decide to leave until New Year's Eve. And we only decided to leave because there was reports that there was going to be aftershocks in India. And I think the thought of there being aftershocks and being in another tsunami was too terrifying for us. So no matter how brave we thought we were being, turning up there, and and the other thing was that the High Commissioner had invited me round to go for drinks when we arrived back to Colombo, because I'd been on the phone to him all night long and all day. So for 36 hours, I'd been glued to the phone with him. So he wanted to say thank you and all that kind of thing. So he had invited me and my, people that I was with around for some drinks at the High Commission. And I remember sitting there with him talking and saying, well, we're here to help with anything that you need, anything that you need help with, we're here to help. And I remember the way that he looked at me and he was like, it's okay, Annie, I think we've got it from here now. And he looked at me in this kind of like kind, warm way, but in a way that made me realize that he saw us as also the victims of this. And until then, I hadn't really allowed that in me to kind of come out, because I thought that's when I'd fallen apart, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, maybe we're a bit more traumatized than we think we are, kind of thing. So Nate actually got us some flights back out to the UK. I remember calling a friend of mine and asking. I remember us being a bit frantic and calling around a few people and saying, "Can you get us flights back to the UK and everything?" And then Nate had already had $10,000 wired over, and he contacted his father and said, "Can you get us all flights?" So the 4 of us ended up all going out. Nate ended up paying for the flights to take us, so me back to London and then back to Sweden. And my friend ended up staying, well, she lived in Sri Lanka anyway, but obviously her boyfriend was not well enough to travel anywhere. And when they did travel anywhere, they went to Australia anyway. So
Gosh, it's amazing what humans can do. And you obviously were in complete flight or flight mode. I can't really imagine the healing process, but obviously when you returned home, you say that it took years and years and years to kind of deal with that process of healing. So I'm curious, how did that journey kind of start, and what steps did you take towards that? Because I can't imagine, when you're incredibly traumatized, where you even begin.
Well, I was so lucky because at the time I was living with a friend of mine who was a manager of a social, like, children's home type thing. So she was, coming from a counselling and care kind of background and everything, and she was super on it when I got home. She basically arranged appointments with my doctors, with psychologists, with, she did the kind of organizing that I did in the tsunami. She did that for me. Brilliant. When I arrived back from the tsunami, because by then I was a little bit catatonic and a little bit, sort of like, that's when the shock had kicked in and the PTSD had kicked in. So she just arranged all this stuff for me. And, so I went to doctor's appointments. They found out that I had infections on my injury. So, I had like cuts and bruises. I didn't have any broken bones, luckily, and nothing too serious, but I had cuts and bruises and all sorts of, injuries to my limbs and things like that. And so my wounds had gotten infected. I had gotten like some of these food poisoning kind of like bacteria and stuff from ingesting all of this dirty water as well. So they got me on antibiotics and whatnot and everything else. And she set me up with going to see a trauma psychologist, or whatever they're called, something, at our local kind of hospital sort of thing. And he was actually a specialist in disaster zones, and also, he actually does Guantanamo Bay victims as well that come out of Guantanamo Bay. So he was really top of his field in terms of the kind of trauma work that he does. And so I started seeing him, and he was doing some EMDR with me as well to help me with some of the kind of, flashbacks and all of that kind of thing. So it was a combination of stuff. But I mean, 3 months later, I got this paralysis on one side of my face. It's called Bell's palsy. And I woke up with it one morning. This is like literally in March now, though. So it's like 3 months later. So this is the impact that it was, the trauma was having on my body, that I'd woken up with this kind of paralysis on one side of my face, which is, I think, a virus that can catch you and stuff, and so the journey wasn't, it was still going on like months later and everything. And my acupuncturist, I went to see my acupuncturist because my sister was getting married in July. And in fact, I was supposed to be going to her wedding in Pakistan in January, but obviously that all got cancelled after I was in the tsunami and everything. But she was getting married in July, and, I don't know if you know Asian families, but they can be pretty critical at times. And I really didn't want to go, having just survived a tsunami, and now I had like one side of my face that was completely open, and you can't eat and you can't speak and you can't do anything. It was like that, It's like when when you see a stroke victim or something. It's like that, At first, I thought I'd had a stroke. So I was seeing this acupuncturist who was doing this facial acupuncture on me to kind of heal. But even now, because I see him now as well, and he said to me, I still remember the day that you came in, you were covered in cuts and bruises, with your face was all cut and everything. Because I'd been trapped under the falling building face first. And so for him to have remembered all of that, and that was still 2-3 months later, so I'd obviously been scarred and everything, then I know it was pretty horrific, really.
Yeah, it sounds it. And it's amazing, isn't it, how our body, it all manifests in the body, and it just takes, it must have taken a long time for it all to be released in some way or other. So then, so at some point you went on to Oprah to talk about your experience. Was that, how soon after was that? And that was really when you set yourself your mission, wasn't it?
Well, the mission has come later, I would say.
Okay.
But but I mean, it's born from that event, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know if I necessarily had the wherewithal to think about my mission back then,
No.
if you see what I mean. But I mean, we went to America. Oh, it was the Oprah interview was quite soon after the tsunami, because obviously everybody was doing their tsunami programs and everything. So I remember Nate calling me up a few days after being home and being really excited to hear from him, because I think we were all very feeling lost at sea. Now that we'd come home, everything was like normal and nobody else had been through this experience, and we'd had this real trauma bond, and we'd experienced these things that no matter how many times you tell the story, no one will ever really understand what you went through. Okay. Because until and unless you go through something like that yourself, you just can't have any conception of it. I remember a friend of mine coming round and saying, "Okay, well, don't worry, we're going to get you back out there. We'll go for cocktails on Friday and all this." And I'm looking at her like, "Are you mad?" Anyway, but I didn't need to say anything, because she'd come round with another friend of mine, and I'd managed to doze off on the sofa briefly because I wasn't sleeping very much, and then the window. I have these Velux windows. And the wind rattled, and the window just kind of like shuddered a little bit. And I woke up screaming, like screaming to high heaven. Okay. Because obviously the shock response and everything.
Yeah.
And I think that she realized that she wasn't getting me to go to any cocktail. But yeah, so I ended up in Oprah pretty soon after, I would say a week or so later. So early January. And I said to Oprah then, I knew that I'd been saved for a purpose. This is what I did know back then. I said, I know I've been saved for a purpose. I don't know what that purpose is right now, but I know that it will become clear as time goes on. And I know that we need to make our lives mean something, because of, there's a lot of survivor guilt when you survive something like that. That's one of the common PTSD symptoms. Okay. But it was good because I was able to turn that survivor guilt into my purpose. So, and I said to her, we need to make the most of our lives, because we were saved when so many others perished. And we need to make our lives count, and, mean something, because, those other people haven't got the opportunity anymore. And this feeling of this, whether you want to call it survivor guilt or whether you want to call it turning it into your purpose, it stayed with me, and it became kind of like my sort of North Star in a way. It was like my kind of like my staff that I was holding on to, and it was the thing that was guiding me. And despite, other depression episodes and PTSD and all this kind of thing, there was this feeling, I do genuinely believe that we die when our soul has come here and done what it's here to do, kind of thing. And that doesn't mean to say that if we've done what we're here to do, then we're going to die the next day or anything. Yeah. But I could just, again, it was this sense of, okay, you haven't done what you're here to do yet. That's why you were not taken. You've been given a second chance because there's more for you to do here. And that feeling, that intuition, that voice, that guide, whatever it is you want to call it, was a very strong feeling for me. And I think given, like I said, my psychic experiences as a child, I wasn't living to my full potential. I was going through the motions. I was, I thought I was, I was working in projects. I was drawn to the BBC for a reason, because I wanted to make a positive difference and change the world and all this kind of thing. So it's not that like I said, I didn't change fundamentally. It's just that I couldn't quite find what that path was and what that looked like for me and all that kind of thing. So, after the tsunami, I ended up going into charity and NGO work, still in projects, but moving out of corporate and public sector and private sector into the charity and the NGO sector, thinking, well, maybe this is my purpose, and that obviously it wasn't that either. And I even ended up in the war in Iraq in 2008, working for an NGO, delivering projects and programs to displace people. So, I was doing worthwhile things, making my life mean something. Saying doing air quotes here.
Yeah.
But but it still wasn't. It still wasn't the path, if you see what I mean.
So when did it become clear what the path was?
Well, do you know what? That's a whole story. Because then I got diagnosed with breast cancer after I'd finished working at the head of projects for Cancer Research UK, and then that took me on a whole nother journey of self-discovery, where I left work and I studied and did many different things to heal myself. I didn't want to do the conventional treatments at first. And I mean, I did do some, I did do some treatments. I never did chemo in the end, and I didn't do any surgery for 3 years, and I didn't do any radiotherapy for 3 years. So, but I did do some things that they wanted me to do. So I wasn't not doing anything completely, but I also knew that healing, I knew that I needed to heal not just from the tsunami, but from my childhood and from everything. Like to me, it was a kind of like, okay, right. The universe keeps giving you the same message, and that's because you're not going onto the right path. And it was that helped me to get onto the right path. So when I'd managed to finally heal from stage 4 cancer and went into remission, I had then studied a slew of different things in the process, not necessarily for others, but for myself. So I'd become an Ayurvedic consultant. I'd done yoga teacher training course, yoga therapy course, meditation instruction, mindfulness instruction. I'd done MSBR courses. I had done Reiki master courses. I had done acupuncture and, I mean, everything and anything in the kind of holistic area. I had supplemented myself. I changed my entire lifestyle. I just did everything that I could think of at that time. And what happened then was that people had naturally started to, I mean, I was always that person in our friendship group that, the person that people come to with their problems, and they want to have like a serious discussion or, someone to listen to, that kind of thing. There are other friends that you go out to go partying with, or that you want to have a great time with, or that make you laugh all the time, that kind of thing. I was the friend that, people come to talk about their serious stuff that's going on. So it always had that. And then post cancer, it was even more so, because people were very inspired by my story. And, then they just friends, family, people like that started to gravitate to me. And I remember speaking to someone in, my like an extended family member, and saying to them, have you spoken to your therapist about this? And she said to me, to be honest, Annie, the conversations that I've been having with you have been so much more helpful than my therapist. And then I realized, oh, of course, you survived tsunami. You had a difficult childhood. You've just gone through a cancer diagnosis and fight that. So maybe this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what life has been preparing you for. So that's how I found my purpose. And that's also where my mission came from. Because once I realized that, I had this gift of being able to support and heal and help others, that I wanted to be able to mark that through being able to impact the lives of 250,000 people. To me, it feels like for every person on earth that I kind of switch on, or, move from their darkness or their challenges into a better version of themselves, where they're full of love and, all of that kind of thing. It's like, for each person I'm doing that, it's like a kind of like an honor to the memory of someone that passed in the tsunami. So it feels very kind of like soul connected for me, very like, like they know that I'm doing that in their memory, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It just makes me, I mean, even now, my heart feels, it just expands, and just feels it's a very kind of like heartfelt sentiment that I have about that.
Oh, I can tell because that's just completely brought tears to my eyes when you said that. It's just really so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, God, what bigger purpose is that than to do that? So, oh my goodness, that's amazing.
And I know it maybe been born out of survivor guilt, but I turn that survivor guilt into something really powerful and precious and amazing and purposeful. And it's not guilt anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's pure love and joy and this gratitude of being given this, being given a second chance and being able to really do something powerful with that and have that impact that I've always wanted to have that positive impact that even as a child I knew that I wanted to have in this world.
Yeah, incredible. So part of that work which you do is helping people for transform and transformation, and part of that is to help people find their purpose, which it's obviously your life led you to that point as well. I know, thinking back to the listeners of this podcast, that at midlife, so many of us get to a point of, life hasn't turned out quite how you imagine it to have turned out. And you get to a point where it's kind of like, is this it? There's a sort of a feeling of emptiness. There's maybe a feeling of detachment, isolation, and yet you feel quite guilty. And I'm talking here from myself. You feel a bit guilty about that because actually you've got so many of the things that you have wanted and dreamed of. Like you might have a nice home and you have the children and all of that. Yet there's a definite feeling of something missing. So what would you say, Annie, to people who are feeling like that?
This is the thing, Polly, this is exactly what I was feeling during pre-tsunami, right? And pre and post-tsunami. That's exactly what I was feeling like. I had what I would consider the outside trappings of success. I had a house. I had the job that I had dreamed of having since I was a 13-year-old. I had money in the bank. I had security. I had friends. I had all these things, I wasn't quite married and had children, but, I had many of the things that we are told that are supposed to make us happy. And I wasn't happy. And I kept thinking to myself, is this it? Is this life? You get up, you go to work, you do your 9 to 5, you come home, you make your dinner, you have some food, watch a telly, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, do it all over again. And this is where my depression and my feelings of malaise and disconnect were coming from. As well, this existential crisis of like, is this it? Is this what life is? God, surely there's got to be more to life than just being born and going to school and college and getting married and having kids and then getting a job and, and all that kind of thing. So I really, really feel your people's pain when they talk about that, because that's exactly what I was feeling. And the thing is I think when you are not aligned with your real purpose and your spiritual purpose, and let's be honest, we are spiritual beings having a human experience here, and I know that from having had near-death experiences. I've seen part of the other side and stuff, so I know that this isn't it, and I'm very confident with that. But I think that until honestly, it was really when you have to really confront your fear of death is one thing, okay? And I think because we have a fear of death, it holds us back. That fear, the survival part of our brain, it holds us back from truly living our full potential, because we won't take a job that's a bit more risky. We won't go into our own business because, well, I won't have a steady income. I don't want to go and live abroad. What about the kids? Where am I going to put them into school? We stop ourselves from doing so many things in our lives because of fear. And so one of the things that we have to get comfortable with is we have to make our peace with the fact that we are all going to die. We don't know when, but we are all going to die, but it's not the end. Okay. It's just another door to another realm. And the other thing is that if you're feeling this way, it's because that is our spirit, our soul telling us you're not aligned with what you're here to do. Okay. Because the problem is we now think that life is about a celebrity culture of being on Instagram and having loads of followers and let's take this selfie and do that. And this is all meaningless style over substance stuff. Okay. We're now more concerned about what we look like than who we really are. But this is where the spiritual disconnect happens. This is where the mental, emotional disconnect happens, because those things don't make you happy, right? You just follow likes and likes and likes. Yes, they give you a dopamine hit, but they're not giving you any fulfillment, any true satisfaction, any real purpose and meaning in your life. And to have meaning and purpose in your life, is you will live much longer when you have purpose and meaning in your life. People that have purpose and meaning in their lives live 10 years longer. If you have a positive mindset rather than the normal mindset, which is programmed to be negative, you're going to live 10 years longer than somebody that isn't. I mean, it's obvious, right? In many ways, but there is actually now so much evidence, scientific evidence, that supports this. It's really important.
Yeah.
Find what that purpose is for you. And that might mean that you don't have a job as a senior executive getting paid 200K a year or whatever, but you go and work as a teacher in a primary school or something, if that's your thing. Do you mean, if you love kids and whatever? But you imagine the looks of the faces of the children that you're having an impact on. And what about those teachers that we all remember when we were growing up that had such a big impact in our lives? I mean, I'm just using teaching as an example.
Oh, it's funny that you use teaching as an example, because I was a primary school teacher for very many years.
Psychics.
Yeah. So no, I was a teacher for very many years. And then I left teaching in my early 40s because I felt like I was letting everyone down at the point. I had 3 of my own children. They were very small. I felt like I was letting the children down. I was teaching because I was being pulled in all directions. So I ended up setting up a tuition business. I bought into a franchise, and I did that for 6 years, thinking that was my purpose, thinking that was where I was going to go. And actually, I just found myself finding it just wasn't the right thing. It just didn't feel right. And I think for me, it suddenly became very clear that I was out of alignment, because I loved teaching in the school and I did love it. But it's when you get those feelings, isn't it, of frustration, of heaviness, of it, then that is a really clear sign that you're not in alignment with what you want to do. And so I've just been on a real kind of journey of finding the things that light me up and following them. And then finally I've done a huge amount of different trainings and realized what I really love, and finally let go of the teaching in May this last year altogether. And I'm still teaching in a different way, but I'm not teaching small children anymore. But yeah, so it's just really fascinating how it winds your way into your life, but you've got to be willing to follow those signs, I think, and recognize those feelings.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, it's also about not getting caught up in the materialistic trap.
Yeah.
Right? Because in terms of the thing is, I coach a lot of senior executives, yeah, but who are very senior in their roles, they're C-suite executives and all that kind of thing. But it's amazing how many of them are not feeling happy, fulfilled, satisfied, etc. And the thing is you've got to be willing to let go of what you think you want in life, in the sense that, being able to have a Tesla car or, a Rolex watch or things like that, they're not important. Okay. They don't give you real joy. Okay, yes, they give you, you can flash it around and all that kind of thing. But some of the richest people are some of the most miserable in the world. Okay, so don't align with what you think, because society says that that's what it is at the moment. It's all about getting in touch with what really brings you joy and letting go of those materialistic things that you think you want, but actually they're not necessarily what you really want. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having material things, by all means enjoy those things, but we have a very consumeristic culture where we just buy, and I'm sure that 90% of it is to fill a hole that we're feeling. Yeah. Because I know that that's what I used to be like. I used to shop because I had a hole with me. So I'd buy shoes and handbags. This is working as a coach and everything, that I would just buy. Now I hate having a handbag now. I'm like, oh, can I stuff everything into my pocket? I'm just
Yeah.
like bored of carrying a handbag and stuff. So, so it's just find what's really brings you real joy. These things, they don't bring us real joy. They're not really the things that bring fulfillment and satisfaction. And everybody's purpose is different, it's obvious what mine is. But other people's purpose may be to have a simple, easy life and to just provide for their families and have a little garden where they grow some vegetables. And that's fine. No one's saying we all have to be living this big, bold lives or anything. But if you're truly content and happy like that, all right, and not just pretending that you are because you're too scared to do something else, there's a difference.
Yeah. So what would be, just to finish, I'm conscious of the time, but a practical step that someone who might be feeling in that real funk right now, what could be sort of a first practical step that they could take to kind of get out of it and kind of set them on that pathway?
Okay. So a couple of things, right? First of all, if you're feeling like that, get support. Okay. Sometimes you cannot do the things on your own. I muddled my way through until my cancer diagnosis on my own. But really, it was when I met my husband, who was my, who just kind of was he was like my coach, I suppose. He was a yoga teacher and a meditation instructor and an Ayurvedic consultant when I met him, and he was he influenced me a lot at that time in terms of leaving my work to go and then study all of these kind of things. And I did the work myself, but it was with the kind of the knowledge of his knowledge, basically, of his kind of teachings and that kind of thing, that I was able to kind of find a different way to be. So I would say sometimes we all have the answers within us, but do you want to waste a whole bunch of time in getting there, or do you want to find out the answers now so you can start living your purpose-driven life and your best life now? Yeah. And so reach out for support. You don't need to be broken to reach out for support. People think, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. Hopefully there's nothing wrong with any of us. Okay. But just because you go and seek out support doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that you are intelligent enough to invest in your own well-being and your own development. And then the second thing, just so that you can do on your own, for example, is start to really notice the things that do bring you joy. So, and be present. Okay. I mean, I know it sounds simple, but it's so difficult for people to be present because most of the time people are worrying or regretting something that's happened in the past, or they're worrying about what they've got to do in the future. Now, just take each day as it comes, live moment to moment. That means if it's a lovely sunny day and you go for a walk around the block, or you go for your morning run or your morning jog, or whatever your thing is, be fully present with doing that. Really notice the change of the colors of the trees at the moment, and really notice how the winter's coming in and the trees are all a bit sparse now and the flowers are kind of dark. Like just noticing nature around you, even in a city, and just being fully present with that, and allowing moments of joy to come into your day through the little things. Life is not about the destination, it's about the journey. Okay. So the problem with the focusing on the destination is that, if you're a hyperachiever or an overachiever or a high achiever, every time you arrive to a destination, you've got another destination to get to. You're not taking any time in really enjoying that. So enjoy the journey and just be present and notice what really brings you joy, and then focus your attention and your energy in that direction.
Yes, I absolutely love that. I've always said it. It's always better to travel than to arrive. It's always about the journey, and particularly when you're traveling anywhere and, physically traveling, it often is. The journey is often the really fun bit as well. So love that, Annie. Thank you so much. Thank you so much today for joining me. I have just really enjoyed chatting to you, and thank you for your vulnerability and for your generosity in sharing everything, because I'm sure it must be, you've told the story many times, and so thank you for sharing it with us today.
Of course, it's a pleasure.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, I am sure you'll agree with me that Annie's courage, her strength, her resilience, just her approach to life is so inspirational. I personally took so much out of that conversation, and I'm absolutely sure that you probably did too. You might have noticed I completely forgot to ask her to share her website and her social media handles. I was so caught up in the moment of her and was enjoying the conversation so much, but then also was very conscious of the time. Anyway, I will share all of her details in the show notes. And if you'd like to get in touch with her and find out more, do head over and have a look. Annie's also written a book about her experience, and that will be out not next year, but early the following year in 2024. So keep your eyes peeled for that. As always, thank you for listening. It really does mean the world. I know how busy you are, so it means everything that you have given up your time to listen to this podcast. And if you enjoyed it, why not share it with a friend? Or even better, you can come over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review there. It really does help get this podcast out there, and hopefully to people who really need to listen to this content. Right, that's it for another week. Have a fantastic week, and I really look forward to speaking to you next week. Bye.